not exactly hidden. I'm just saying that we're all damn lucky the galaxy is the way it is. Could you imagine cross-species breeding without it? Not only would it not be possible at all, but we would have horror stories beyond all definitions. Brinchar hears someone say before he even enters the room. He pauses. "Oh, please." His son dismisses. "No, really. There are these sharks on Earth that have free-for-all fights in the womb. There are insects that are devoured from the inside out by their children. There are..." Okay, enough. I don't need to hear about freaking animals and their freakiness. I'm just saying, the galaxy having a general one-size-fits-all is really, really lucky. Could you imagine if there was... No. I don't want to hear it, Derchar says, and Brinchar snorts. He opens the door and the general mood drops. That's something he's going to have to get used to. Feel better? Koga asks, and he pauses. No, and yes. He answers, and there's some nodding. It's like vomiting. The sensation is horrific, but it can save you. Save me. Do you know how many children we saved, be they in stasis, containment, or already being abused? Koga asks. No. A full third of all missing children on the planet over the past few years. We saved an army of innocent children. That would be... Brinchar begins before honestly thinking, and his eyes widen. The Empress has called in every temp worker she can get her hands on to help sort through and return home all the 400,000 plus children. What? That number was far, far too high. The ones in full-on stasis were stacked high and tight. From what we understand, the very much unlamented Orega girls would keep a child in stasis for 5 years before even touching them, then move them to basic transportation with the collars like Morg Arkin found. That's when they sell them. This was a dirty job and you did the dirtiest part, but it was still about as righteous as it gets. That does help. It helps a great deal, in fact. I was wondering if I could borrow my son for a few minutes. There's no protest as Derchar stands up and quickly follows him out. They're guests in the palace of the Empress, mostly because she expected corpses she could parade around as conquered enemies, and being delivered rescued children by the hundreds of thousands and entire libraries worth of blackmail material was something else entirely. To say nothing of the tens of thousands of arrests going on around the world that she's pulling rank on and ensuring the sentences start at 100 years long. His revenge and personal grudge was just a small piece of a larger whole, as everyone seemed to be piling on to try and abuse the Orega girls in as many different ways as possible. Brutal death for the high-end ones, exposure and unending shame for those in hidden positions. The thugs were being rounded up like animals, and the silent supporters were having everything they valued stripped from them. Their walk leads them to a balcony that overlooks the ocean. In the past, this place was chosen for its defensive value. Then spaceflight was brought to the Apuk, and it became a traditional seat of power, as if the ancient war ladies didn't just make wherever they were their seat of power. "Do you want to talk?" he asks Derchar, and there's no answer. Great. Teenage sulk. His daughters just get snippy and ignore him as an idiot man when they do this. Fine, we need to talk. You make it sound like a marriage isn't working. Derchar mocks and Brinchar grins. Good. That's a good first step. I already got most answers out of Vernon. You wanted to stop the facility from flooding, and that's why you were on the other side of the bulkhead. You saw nothing but a woman freak out, and he closed it up before I showed up. Yay. Derchar remarks with enough something pressed into that one word that there should have been at least a couple paragraphs to let it air out. Just let it out. Trust me when I say holding it in makes it worse, Brinchar says, and Dare nearly flinches in frustration. Oh yes, because ancestors forbid that things get worse. Oh wait, no, I shouldn't say that. Apparently, I'm one of my dead ancestors back from the grave. No wonder you want to spend time with me. It's sibling bonding time, just a few centuries delayed. Brinchar says nothing. I can't believe I was so stupid, thinking I could just jump in and be a part of something on this world, a whole civilization that still uses silt-sucking noble titles and absolute power in the person with the biggest stick to hit others with. Of course I wouldn't be allowed in as Dare Crushclaw. It has to be Darechar because I'd have no business here otherwise. Brinchar says nothing. 6 months and all I learn is that I'm a replacement for someone I've never even heard about until you start freaking out about him. Darechar's rant dies down as he hangs his crossed arms over the railing and glares out at the ocean. May I speak? Brinchar asks and Darechar snorts. Can't stop you, brother. He spits out the last word like he's trying to embed it in something. All right, first off, that wretch had terrible eyesight, which makes a lot of sense as the darkness and water can distort what you see. You are not Zulchar. I've never mistaken you for him for even a moment, nor would anyone with common sense or working eyes. There's a distinctly different cast around the eyes, which are the wrong color to begin with. You have a greater tendency to freckle and his ears stuck out more, and that's just the face. He hated water where we can barely keep you out of it. I'm afraid there's not much more on the personality front because Zulchar was killed before he could get much more. You are your own man. Yes, there are similarities, but I'm literally his twin, so between the two of us I see him in the mirror far more than I see him in you. The huff of acknowledgement isn't as much of a reaction as he would like, but Brinchar counts it as a good first step. Now, as to your jumping in and being part of the culture, you're a man. You're welcome in every culture. I hate to break it to you, my boy, but men don't so much have a culture in the galaxy, so much as we're dragged into whatever our wives are part of. They're the ones with the numbers. They're the ones that set the trends, ideas, and languages. We're just along for the ride. So sorcery means nothing? By itself, everything can mean nothing. Without the Apuk culture of martial self-mastery and the overprotectiveness of the sons causing us to either stifle at our bonds and run or outright shatter for a mental break, there would be no sorcerers. Where men engage, a culture begins and often ends with what positions his wife wants to have sex in. That, the majority of men the galaxy over rarely, if ever, venture out of their own homes. You've taken the steps to become a sorcerer. That means that you don't deal with Apuk culture, it deals with you, Brinchar says, looking out at the ocean and not at Dare. And as for Apuk being primitive and savage, you got that one right. We may have all the food we need, and the starships mean that if someone wants lands or to get away from a neighbor they hate, they can just go. But we're an aggressive race. We also don't want that to change. Things are amazingly simple when you can challenge the person annoying you to a duel, and you can even say to the death and really solve your problems with some good old-fashioned murder. It's savage, Dare says, and Brinchar nods. Yes, because the corruption and self-indulgence of other races is so wonderful. The extreme taxation and unilateral removal of property, personhood, and assets is so civilized. In the end, no one has anything to brag about. There is no society or way of life that's perfect, and anyone that promises to get it right is just trying to sucker you. Yay, sure. You're not Zul, he's dead, burned and buried, Brinchar says. Darechar makes a sound of affirmation. Would you like to see it? Brinchar offers, and Darechar gives him an odd look. I made a tomb for him, and after bringing it up, my parents let me enter his ashes there. Are you going to offer this to my cousins? Darechar asks, and Brinchar freezes before slumping down. There aren't any. None of them really lived all that long. Oldest of the bunch hit 3 centuries before she went off on a ship with a terrible mechanic. There are some surviving lines, but there are at least 3 generations apart and the link is thin at best. So maybe someone you give a call to, but not some that has room for you in their life or vice versa. Derchar considers out loud. Pretty much. There are a lot of them, and I will be getting in contact with them all. But it's distant. They're family, but distant. And that's all that matters, isn't it? Blood. No, they also have lives of their own, and the drama and complication of a sorcerer isn't something to force on people. Derchar says, and Brinchar sighs. There's more, isn't there? Some other concern you haven't spoken of. Brinchar says, and Derchar says nothing. I won't be angry. You are angry at them, Derchar mutters after a few minutes. Comparing yourself to the Orega girls is as inaccurate as saying the stars are cold. I don't know what happened in there, but I was paying attention, focusing on the axiom and the life energy. They were so scared. You were so angry, and there was so much pain I could almost taste the blood on my gills. Oh, I could feel my own bones creak and crack, Derchar says, and Brinchar just nods. Yeah, I know. There's a reason I didn't want you to watch. Why I didn't want you that close. Yeah, Derchar mutters. You still want to do this? Brinchar asks. Huh? The training. You don't have to keep training as a sorcerer. I'm sure your mother would understand if you just want to leave at this point. She visits often enough, but it's pretty clear she would love to have you back full time. Brinchar offers, and Derchar just looks away. I understand. I'll give her a call. No, I just thought. I don't know what I thought, Derchar says, and Brinchar gives him an odd look. So you still want to be a sorcerer, even after getting that close to the blood and vengeance side of things? Well, I'm part of the new wave, aren't I? The type that gets strong first so we don't have to go out for revenge. I mean, could you imagine how different things would be if you were a sorcerer before you and Zulchar were jumped? Derchar asks, and Brinchar nods with a grin at that happy thought. I'd be a very different man, although likely a happier one, he says, as the grin turns into a smile. And I can respect that logic. No better way to handle an injury than simply not having it to begin with. Speaking of injuries, you did offer to show me his tomb, right? Derchar asks, and Brinchar nods. I think I should meet him, if only to say hello. Of course, there's going to be a bit of a smell because I've been indulging in some of the more martial aspects of honoring his enemies. Skulls? Some fresh even. Oh, well, I'm going to be there for my uncle. Not for them. They're just decoration. Exactly, Brinchar says, and he puts his hand on his son's shoulder. Come on. Reality breaks down to their perspective, and a comforting sensation of something utterly enormous that they are both apart from and a part of fills them both. Reality comes back together at the mouth of a cave, perfectly carved and heading into the mountain. Brinchar conjures a handful of flame and leads Derchar in. It isn't needed long, as very shortly. The light returns to reveal an opening from above with a shaft of light lancing down on the figure of a sleeping child worked into a large sarcophagus. How the axiom resonating crystals are lining that shaft. If there's any light to be had, then it's amplified and sent down. It was something to work on as I mastered molding of earth and stone, Brinchar says as they fully enter the chamber. All along the walls are alcoves in which skulls are both set and angled downwards, as if in shame or supplication. He makes a point of ignoring the ones that still have flesh on them. Father and son walk up to the sarcophagus, and Brinchar puts his hand on the sculpture's head. Hello, brother. This is the son I told you about. This is your nephew, Derchar. He was worried for a bit that he was just your replacement. Pretty goofy. He looks nothing like you. No one could replace you. No one can replace him either. So don't you fret. I'm still living enough for us both. Derchar says nothing, suddenly aware that this is something very private and very personal that he's been given permission to see. But he has no idea what to do with it. I found out about the descendants one of the new heads told me about. There's an entire lineage of them. A bit of you still alive in ways I didn't think possible. I'm going to talk to them, but I won't force them into anything. They're living quiet lives. Good, wholesome, and then over. Of course you don't need me to tell you this. You've probably met a few already. Trying to feel like he's not in the middle of something incredibly awkward and like he's not intruding with all the grace of a leviathan in a ballroom, Derchar begins scanning the area around the sarcophagus without looking at the actual walls with all the skulls looking down. Creepy as hell that. He then finds what's either a song or a long poem with a refrain in it carved into the pedestal upon which the sarcophagus lays. It's written twice, once in Galactic Trade and once in Cinder Tongue. Unfortunately, reading it just makes things even more awkward and uncomfortable for Derchar, but thankfully his father finally picks up on it and moves on from his mourning. He wraps an arm around Derchar and they vanish from the tomb.